Hi, my name is Clare and I'm the mother of 3 teenagers with FASD.
I'm Jessica, a PhD researcher specialising in educational interventions for children with FASD.
And together we are the hosts of Spotlight on FASD, the UK's first podcast dedicated to shining a spotlight on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASD is a condition caused by prenatal alcohol exposure that affects hundreds of thousands of children across the UK.
And we're here to bring these conversations out of the shadows and make sure that no one living with FASD feels alone. Hi and welcome back to the next episode of Spotlight on FASD. I'm back in the saddle this week. I want to say thank you to Jessica for covering me when mothering FASD children became a little bit too overwhelming for me last week. So I really appreciate that Jess hopped in and went solo this week. So we're continuing with our theme about education. And this week we want to talk to you about reduced hours in school and part-time timetables, and we want to talk about what that looks like, why it might be necessary, the benefits of it, and mostly, our hope is that it's education professionals listening to this, taking some advice from this when it comes to FASD. And what we hope to do, I certainly hope to do by the end of this episode, is if it's something that you didn't know much about, thought was a last resort or didn't think was a positive thing, I hope to try and change your mind a little bit about it and about why it's necessary. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to reduced hours and part-time timetables, so it's something that I didn't even know existed. I didn't know that it was a thing. I grew up knowing that school was 5 days a week, inside the same building, term times, then you had your school holidays, and that was what education looked like, and it had to look like that for everybody. Everybody had to fit in to that system. We always stick with this. We do the best we can until we know better, and when we know better, we do better. So we know better now, and we know that all children can't fit in to our current education system the way it looks, and we know that on the whole our education system currently causes a lot of trauma for children with special educational needs, especially fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, because it's predominantly undiagnosed and nobody knows that child is living with that brain injury and trying to navigate school. So I think I was introduced, I didn't know that I was requesting what I was requesting for the first of my children that I requested reduced hours for, but I just seen a need. So I knew that arriving at school, this was when we reached primary, I just knew that arriving at school with everybody else, so with all of the other cars, walking with all of the other children and parents and grandparents and carers, and then the yard, getting into the yard, as much as 2 out of 3 of my children loved the thought of that, or they thought they loved the thought of it, but it was like literally pouring petrol onto a live flame, because I would just see them be sucked into the yard and just kind of go up into this vortex of wildness. Mm-hmm. And so that's where they were, and then all of a sudden it was bell would ring and you've got to get in a line, so you are up here and then you've got to stand still in a line. No, that's a physical impossibility when you've got FASD, but that was what was expected. I was expecting that. I'm not saying that none of the teachers shouldn't have been expecting that of my children. I was expecting that of my children because at that point I didn't know they had FASD. So, but what I did realise was it wasn't good for anyone. So my little girl, it would take a couple of teachers to peel her off, and then it was awful because people were watching her being that upset, and she felt like people were watching her. And with the boys, it would just have them absolutely on the ceiling, and I know, I can only imagine how long it would regain the equilibrium of getting them into any kind of productive state in class. So it would be a good idea also for my sanity to start bringing them in, and I didn't realise it until it was too late for one of them and he kind of moved on, but starting just a little bit after registration, because really, certainly in a primary school, you're not talking enormous numbers of children. So is it really a massive deal if one child comes in 15 minutes later? If it means that they're going to be able to be quite calm, you're still going to know that they're there. You can still put them on the register. So I got into a habit. I asked school. I remember when I first asked it, and they were like, right, we're not quite sure how that's going to work, and because the gate will be locked. And but it was quite straightforward to get around. So I would come in 10-15 minutes later, so that and a lot of the time the children was, they were just getting into class and settling, but would missed all of the traffic, the noise, all of the people would missed all of that, and it made a huge difference. And
everything was overstimulating them.
Yeah, and technically that's reduced hours. You are adjusting a timetable there. You're making an adjustment. They are reduced hours. It doesn't, because I know a lot of people, when they think part-time timetable, like that might be, you just want your children to go to school 2 days a week. No, it could be shaving 20 minutes off a day, but shaving 20 minutes of really crucial time. So at the point where where everyone has got the coats on, so I'm thinking of primary now, at the point where everyone's got the coats on, and they're about to start and line up, ready for the bell to go to get, for the meet the parents in the yard. At the point where they haven't left the classroom yet, what's the harm in your child coming out through, the main reception, where the receptionist is, picked up by you, and away from all that as well? And I just think that there are so many positives to be had from something like that, and predominantly for the child, which is at the heart of everything, but also for the parents and the carers, because chances are there's something to report at the end of a school day, and having that in front of everyone in a yard is very stressful compared to having that privately when you're being handed over a child where there's nobody's around to witness it or to hear it or to see. From the child's perspective, nobody's there watching the teacher tell your parent or carer what has happened that day or what's gone on. So I think that it's something that I would like to think schools are becoming a little bit more flexible around and not as closed off to, but I did believe that until this last 10 days, when I'm experiencing the total opposite. From a special school, which is even more shocking to me that it can be so rigid, because education for any child does not have to look like 5 days a week inside one building.
And it certainly shouldn't within any sort of special education provision.
Yeah, and ideally it would, because that would fit the model that's there, it would fit people's lives, and the children who have no issue with that, brilliant.
It'd be perfect for like training to go to work and having that routine and this, great.
But our children don't fit into that box, but we're constantly kind of snap pieces off them to squeeze them in, to make it work, to make them fit into that box. And it's been said to me so often, and it's just kind of quoted, but well, we know that the best thing for your child is for them to be in school 5 days a week, full days, 5 days a week. We know that that's the best thing for them. Do you really? Because I disagree. And how do you know that that's the best thing? So, it's a huge thing to be kind of coming back to. It's a huge thing to be going back to someone to say, I disagree. So I've done my homework and I've tried to dig out the research, because I think I've got so many people saying this to me, then they've got to have something to back this up. Because I'm on the verge, I find myself wanting, and I don't, because I'm always very, very professional, but I want to say, says who like, I don't think you're wrong. You are wrong. And it's just it's something that's really, really frustrating me at the minute, because if COVID has provided us with nothing else, it has provided us with a bit of an insight into the fact that education can look like a lot of different things, and no one's saying that the best place for children to be educated is at home all of the time. That's probably not a good idea for anyone, and I don't believe, you know, I suppose I'm thinking from my point of view, to full-time home educate a child, to me that would have to be a last resort. You know, that's not something that I think, oh, that sounds amazing, I really, really want to do that. I'm going to be totally honest and say that is absolutely not something that I want to be doing. But equally, if the education that's on offer for my child is harmful to them, it's not conducive to positive mental health, to physical health, to learning, to gaining an education, if that's not happening in those 5 days inside that building, why would I want to continue to expose them to that? Yeah. And I think that's what I've been thinking a lot about.
And I just thought there, as you mentioned that, you know, the home education and doing that full time, and the people who do choose to do that, you know, the home education curriculum is not 8:30 till 3 Monday to Friday. That's not typically how it works. Home education, when it's intense, one parent to 2 children, 3 children, however many children, certainly not 30, then, you know, the hours are reduced.
Yeah.
Home education might finish at lunchtime, or it might only be afternoons, or it might only be an hour or 2 here and there throughout the day, and everything else is around embedding the learning in other activities. So the home education approach and curriculum and what has been widely accepted within that community is worlds away from mainstream, yet special education and those sorts of provisions are taking themselves right the way over to replicate a mainstream environment as much as they possibly can with this 5-day-a-week provision, rather than learning from that homeschool curriculum that's more tailored to the individual needs on the day of the students in question. And it's, you know,
when it comes to FASD, sleep plays such a huge role, doesn't it? So we spoke about this, didn't we, when we did the sleep episode? Very difficult, very, very difficult to plan. But this morning, for example, I had 2 out of 3 who were still awake at 8 AM. And that was despite trying to get to sleep from well before midnight the night before. And it just, their brain injury doesn't allow for it on certain times. So that means that, you know, if I was home educating them, nothing would have been happening this morning, because it was 8:30 before they went to sleep, so they needed to get some sleep. But at 7 o'clock tonight, things could be happening, and work could be getting done, and learning could be getting done. And I think that one of the biggest lessons that I learned just from observing my children trying to survive school and the education system was that, and I think when I learned about the sensory, so the sensory stuff feeds into everything. When I learned what I learned about their sensory needs and the strain that was having on their little bodies and their minds, I started to work out, it was kind of common sense told me that in order for children with FASD certainly navigating mainstream, so imagine a mainstream secondary setting, about 800, 1,000 kids, and all of the different teachers and the different blocks and the different classrooms, and the corridors and the time changes and the minutes, all of that. So the energy, the level of energy, and I think I watched my daughter one day. I watched her from the night before, psyching herself up to be able to try and get into school the next day. And then I seen what it took from about 6:30 in the morning, and I eventually got her into school a little bit later, going behind all the buses, just 5 minutes later, but it meant everything was out of the way. I watched her get in, and I could see how physically exhausted she already was then. And when you understand FASD and you know just a few things off the top of your head, so when someone is verbally communicating with you, you're picking up maybe every third word, so your mind's trying to string together what somebody's trying to ask of you, the information they're trying to give you. You are so aware, there's all the sensory things that you're having to juggle. So walking into school and having to interact with people, think about where you need to be, have to talk to people. You know, if you're managing it on your own, trying to get from lesson to lesson, get to a toilet, navigate lunch, that, you know, I always think that like they must use about 4 times the energy
Yeah.
of a neurotypical brain. They must use about 4 times that amount of energy. So this is my science. This is Clare's science behind FASD and full-time timetables in school. And can I just say that I would sell my soul for my children to be able to access school 5 days a week in a physical school building, and I would move heaven and earth if it was the right thing for them to do, because I would be able to have a life selfishly where I could work properly and I could get things done and we could all have a balance. But it's not possible. And even though it's not possible, we're still kind of forced to try and, well, yeah, well, no, it doesn't work for you, but yeah, that's the best thing. No, it's not, because we're in crisis. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and we can see how hard it is, but that's actually, yeah, that's the best thing, and that's all you hear. So I kind of worked out my science behind it was they're using about 4 times the energy just to be, and that's without starting on the learning. That is just
Yeah.
So if that's the case, a 5-day school week for children like mine with the kind of brain injury, and we're not even touching on trauma and attachment and everything that brings as well, just purely looking at FASD, then that's the equivalent of a neurotypical child doing a 20-day school week without a weekend. So at the point a neurotypical child got to say day 17 without a day off school, can you imagine where their behaviour, for want of a better word, is? But everybody would, you know, everybody would be saying, oh, I know, but on a day 17, like they can barely function. They are so exhausted. They're doing so well. Look at the effort they're putting in. Look how hard they work. And they've done 17 days. Our kids, a normal week, what looks normal to other people, that is the level of exhaustion it is for them. But it is expected of them. And rather than anyone have the attitude of, this is heroic. This is heroic, the effort he is putting in. It's Wednesday and he's on his 3rd day in school. What is focused on is by Thursday, that behaviour is unacceptable.
Yeah.
That's what's focused on. And it's such a shame, because I reached the point when my daughter was still in mainstream, and we talk about all the time the fact that I talk on here, and she wants me to talk about these things because she wants people to understand it better. I was just non-negotiable about the fact that she needed to have a rest day on a Wednesday. Non-negotiable. She is not well enough to come in, and she genuinely would sleep all day on a Wednesday. It wasn't like a day off and we would go out and do something. She didn't get out of bed to recover enough to be able to manage a Thursday and a Friday. And even then, you know, because by that point, my mainstream secondary absolutely were on board with, yeah, you're right, they cannot manage this amount of hours. So, you know, a Thursday and a Friday would be much shorter days, depending on what the lessons were. You know, and I know I've seen my Sundays when, in the days where they were able to access, and certainly the same school, where doing like 8 round trips, because staggering things just made it much easier in the long run for everybody. And I think, you know, no mother in the right mind, when she's juggling 3 kids and trying to work, is going to just create that level of work for herself for the hell of it, unless it was really having a massive positive payoff. So I think, no, I know I'm talking now, but this is something that I'm living this right this minute now. This is, you know,
this is the challenge that you're facing right now. This is it. The lack of understanding around the area is what is causing the harm that your children are currently experiencing, the struggles that they're currently, you know, working through. But I think what, you know, just to try and summarize everything that you've just said there, I think that the main point is that we look at just being in school. So forget the learning, forget trying to do any maths, forget trying to listen to the teacher for 40 minutes, forget all of that. Turning up, being in the school building. We've already addressed the sleep problems. We've done a whole episode on that. So, you know, if you haven't heard that episode, check that out, because that comes into it here. Sensory processing issues. We did a whole mini series on that. Go check out those episodes, because we'll bring all that information in here. Cognitive fatigue. On top of physical exhaustion, and, you know, yeah, you've got your cognitive fatigue, but you've also got your physical exhaustion. We also need to consider any other, you know, there's over 420 coexisting conditions that come with FASD. So also thinking about other challenges that make just functioning through those times very, very challenging. We then bring in any mental health challenges that anybody's having. And, you know, just to consider for a second, if we look at, I mean, teenagers probably is the best place to look for any education professionals. But any teenagers who you're aware of who are struggling with really, really low self-confidence, really low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, any of those kind of things, bring that into the mix as well here. And you can see how we're starting to pile up all these barriers, all these challenges that make such a complex whole to varying levels. You know, some days, and for some individuals, the mental health challenges will be higher. Some days the cognitive fatigue will be higher. Some days the sleep problems will be the factor that is really coming into play here. All these different things, but we're expecting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right there on time. And I think what it comes down to ultimately is an expectation. And I'm almost certain that we've had this conversation before on at least one episode, but it's a societal expectation that we're placing on children and young people and adults with a very much unknown, unrecognised, hidden disability. Because we can't see it, we place those societal expectations that are placed on every other child onto this population as well. Now, if you are aware of a child, like we'll go really extreme, mainstream education, one of the children in your classroom has lost a parent, terrible accident or something, let's say. The staff in that school would be bending over backwards to accommodate if that child's behaviour was erratic, if that child was displaying signs of poor mental health, if that child was unable to engage in their lessons. And that's how, like, we as society, we accommodate that immediately. You know, something terrible has happened, we accommodate that. Everybody comes together. What can we do? What can we do? How can we support this child? Let's take them out of the classroom. Let's find them another space that's quieter. Let's support them at break times and lunch times, so that all the other kids aren't asking questions and you know, wondering what's going on. Let's do everything that we can to wrap that child in cotton wool and be their protective blanket during the time that they're in this building. But we don't place those same adjustments on a child with FASD. And it's no different. They've experienced something. Whether they've experienced some really, really significant trauma that you're aware of or not, or in their lifetime, like post-birth, I'm talking here, or, you know, in the time they've been attending your school, completely irrelevant. It is still there. And Claire and I were talking before we started recording about how from day one, so early on in a child's life, their body has absorbed everything that they've experienced, all the trauma, anything positive, anything negative, their body is absorbing it all, and it's shaping who they are becoming. And this person-centered approach, which you would expect to see from a special education provision, probably more so, seems to be something that we're finding really difficult. And I don't know, like, I'm not an education expert, and I would really, really love to hear from anybody who can advise on this. You know, is there government pressure?
I think I think they are measured by the same, you know, I think the same. Yeah, I think that they've got to hit the same kind of targets, and which just seems silly, because what's the point of even having a special setting if the targets aren't going to be different and we're not going to look at things in a different way? And I know it's
very place, like, you know,
it's so difficult though, because predominantly you are offered a place in an SAMH school, social, emotional, mental health setting for a child with FASD, and it's a brain injury. It's not, the need isn't SAMH. That there will be some social and emotional things going on as a result of trying to navigate an education system with a brain injury. But at the minute, as a parent, you've got to kind of just pick the best of a bad bunch, because nothing exists to fit our children yet, and it absolutely will, but it doesn't yet. So the only thing we can do, and the educational professionals who are listening to this, who are dedicated, and I know there are just hundreds and thousands of you, that you are truly dedicated to making a difference to children and young people's lives, and you really, really want to. So this is to you. You know, we do have to make the best of what we have at the minute, because until we can create the correct kind of schools, we can only deal with what we've got. So please be mindful that some kind of reduced hours or some kind of part-time timetable doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing. It's not letting anyone off with anything. It's not, it doesn't mean that one child is getting, having to do less than another child, and that's unfair. The unfairness is actually the other way around. But we're expecting, we'll say this so many times, but the level of expectation on a child with FASD, certainly in a mainstream setting, without the right kind of adjustments, without the right kind of reductions in hours and reduction in pressure, is exactly the same as you having a child in your class with cerebral palsy who's in a wheelchair and being prepared to kind of punish them if they can't get to the maths lesson on the first floor up 2 flights of stairs at the right time. It's no different. My children are protected by law equally to a child with a physical disability. Well, their disability is a physical. It is physical. It is a physical disability.
I was having a conversation with
you can't see it with your naked eye. So I think we just need to be very accepting of that within education, and also, because I try to be as positive as I possibly can. To me, these tiny little changes, these tiny little tweaks to a timetable, you are showing, you're gaining the confidence of the parent or the caregiver, because you're letting them know that you're prepared to do what it takes for that child to be able to function in school, because you want them in there as much as they can cope to be in there. And also, you're going to make things easier for the child. You're going to make things easier for yourself, for the rest of the class. And I think it's sometimes, because I've helped lots of families try and kind of negotiate with schools about reduced timetables and why they should have them and what difference they're going to make. But actually, I don't really know of a situation where it hasn't helped, and it might be a temporary thing, because what I'm definitely not saying is every child with FASD needs to have a reduced timetable, because sometimes you can flip it on its head, and if they do not have the absolute concrete structure of this time they leave the house, they go to school, they're there all day on those days, then their little worlds fall apart. But this is the thing about this spectrum of disorders. You know, and when I was listening to you talk there, when you're looking at a child in a classroom and all of the different things that they're having to cope with before they're even learning, and how exhausted they are, and then they just cannot perform, and we're expecting them to do it day after day after day. The thing about FASD is, one day during that week, all things might just, like the planets might just align, and somebody might just have worked his way around the clock 3 times, but sleep just happens to arrive at 10:30 at night, and they sleep all night and they wake up and they are able to get to school, and they are able to be in school and engage all day. And what you find is, instead of that being celebrated as a triumph and acknowledge that, let's just work towards whenever we can get that to happen again, quite often it is, well, they are perfectly capable of doing that because they've done it.
Expectation.
Yeah.
But you did it last week, so why?
And you know, quite often you've got, you know, we've talked about this before, about the memory issues, the memory gaps, where you might have a child in your class and you've got that work in the workbook and they did it the day before, and the next day they can't do it, and you think they're just trying to wind you up, and they're not, and it's terrifying for them. It's frustrating for you, absolutely, but it's terrifying for them. So I think it's just it's just, we need people that have a shift in expectation and a shift in attitude, and we appreciate that these expectations and these beliefs have been trained into you. That's part of your training, through your teacher training, through whatever role within education you play, but also society. I grew up, you know, it was non-negotiable. It was school, Monday to Friday, term time. That's the way it had to be. You know, what I find, a hurdle that I'm trying to scramble me little short legs across at the minute with not a lot of luck, is my children, certainly 2 of them, what we've identified over the years is term time and holiday time. That just does not work. It's detrimental. We need to have something a little bit more continuous in place, because every time that slight routine and structure stops for a half term or a holiday, we reset and we'll go back to the beginning, and quite often a step further back. Yeah. And we haven't got enough time in our education life to be able to keep taking all those steps back. And just because our children's brain injury means that happens to them, they shouldn't be penalised for that happening. They shouldn't be penalised for having a brain injury. And at the minute, it sounds like I'm bashing education. I'm not, because we've had, you know, I have had and I'm having some amazing experiences and work with some wonderful, wonderful pioneering education professionals. But it has been the biggest battle throughout my life with the kids, and it's their biggest battle, and it causes them such heartache and exhaustion and sadness and mental health problems. And surely that is not what we want our education system to be doing.
It's often the place where FASD is first identified as well. It's often the place where, you know, all those little signs and things start to appear, and, you know, where you first start to see it if you've not seen it already. And, you know, what is really, really important here is that this, well, as Claire describes it, it's a brain injury. It's a physical disability, but it's one that you can't see. It's a physical disability that's internal, and I think that's something that's a bit tricky to get your head around as well. You know, you think of physical disabilities, but you don't associate them with somebody who's walking around and looks like every other child. But that means that these children don't necessarily fit into the box of a SEND school, because they're just not. They just don't work. That population who the SEND schools are typically designed for and are very well suited for and accommodate the needs of brilliantly, FASD just does not line up. And then, as Claire said before, the same with the SEMH schools as well. This is not a mental health problem. If a child with FASD is suffering from mental health challenges, they come on top of the FASD. The underlying problem here, the underlying thing that we need to focus on is the FASD. So they don't really fit into the SEMH school box either. We know they don't really fit into the mainstream box. Now, if any children with FASD are functioning really, really well and are attending and thriving in any of those schools, fantastic. That's amazing. But it's a complexity thing. So if the complexity of that individual's FASD allows them to fit in that box and to thrive there, fantastic. But generally speaking, they don't fit into any of these boxes. And as Claire said, you know, until the right place is created, we need to alter our expectations.
Because imagine this, right? Imagine every day of your school life, and there will, you know, this is a very real example, and there will be children that this is life for them. But imagine, on the whole, people who are able to access, you know, a quality of life that we're very, very lucky to be able to access. But imagine you going to school every single day with shoes that are 2 sizes too small for you every single day, and you've got to wear them all day. For your whole school life, you have got to wear these shoes, and their fit just keeps getting worse. Can you imagine how much pain you would be in? Or you imagine you did 10 years in a career in the civil service and you had to go to work every day in a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small. You had to wear those shoes because that's what people do, and they don't fit. So it would cause physical damage to your body. It would destroy your mental health, your motivation. Everything about your life would start to fall apart because this didn't fit properly. You know, to be so grateful and so fair to our wonderful, on the whole, workforce of teachers and education professionals, you are trying to make something fit children with FASD that is absolutely not designed to fit them, and you are on the whole trying your best, turning yourselves inside out to accommodate and to try and make things work. And a lot of the time you don't even know you're doing it, you just following your gut, and you know you're trying to make things better for this little boy that nothing seems to be working for. Chances are you might never be diagnosed with FASD, but that's what it is, and you are trying your best to make his life a little bit better. You know, we want to try and help you understand what it is that you're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And to try and make things a little bit easier until we're in a position where you're applying for jobs in an FASD school, which you will be doing at some point.
Having said that, if there's anybody listening who has had a recent lottery win or has, you know, come into some incredible amounts of inheritance or something and feels very, very passionately about education and FASD, get in touch, because we
want to build it.
We can build it. Well, we can't build it, but we'd love to be part of the
dreams. We will create it. Yeah, that's what we want to create, because it's just so needed, and it will happen. But for now,
they do exist. FASD specialist classrooms do exist, just not in this country. They exist in Canada. There are FASD specific school departments in Canada. I can't remember if it's a specific building, but there's definitely classrooms that have been built onto the side of a school. Why can't we do that?
Yeah.
Well, we need to start diagnosing first, but then why can't we start doing that?
Well, but in the meantime, you know, we just wanted to talk about reduced hours, part-time timetables, but that they're not necessarily a negative thing. They're not necessarily a failure on anyone's part. They're a reasonable adjustment.
And it's certainly not an extended weekend or anything like that.
Yeah, you know, so that was just something that we wanted to broach that subject with people, and ask anyone to get in touch if they've got any experience, positive or negative, about it, because we need to start hashing all of this out. This is something that it's not going away. We need to move forward with education around FASD. We know the prevalence of it, and we know what's about to happen over the next few years. So this is just something that's going to become more and more part of your everyday language and your everyday knowledge, really. So we would love to hear from you if you have had some positive experiences around reducing hours or, you know, shaving a timetable down a little bit.
And not necessarily FASD either. If you've got experience of implementing part-time timetables for other children in any other capacity or context, then still applies. We still like to hear from you.
So, you know, we want it to be on the contrary of a negative podcast. I want this to be a really positive thing, because I have found nothing but gains from convincing education to just, you know, well, how about if we just start at this time, that make it a little bit better? Can we just finish at this time? You know, how, well, she doesn't do those 2 lessons. What about if she just finishes then, you know, that's like 2 hours earlier, then she can have a nap. And, you know, so just to be flexible and to think about, you know, and for us to try and give you the knowledge to be able to back up decisions if you're going to your line managers to say, this is what I think could be a good idea, you know, or, you know, speaking to the Senko in your school about, you know, I think if he started at 9:15, I don't think we would have that escalation in the morning. Is that an option to do? So we just wanted to put it out there that it can work to everyone's advantage, and it's not like it's not giving in. Some people see it as giving in a little bit and letting people get off with things, and it's actually the opposite. So that was this week's episode around education. We really want to hear from you if there's anything that you are struggling with, because I've had a few private messages this week from friends who are teachers asking a couple of things, which is just, it gets us so excited that it's now on the radar for people where it wasn't probably on the radar. I think, can you send us a link to this, because I think I've got this going on in my classroom, and I'm like, yeah, you absolutely have. The statistics show that you absolutely will have. If you haven't got it going on in your classroom is an exception to the rule. So, you know, if you think you have, yeah. So it's lovely, and I love to think that we can play some kind of role in helping people access that information.
Yeah.
So as always, thank you for listening, predominantly to me this week. I suppose I've like paid you back a little bit for last week. I just have not shut up, because this is something that's got my an
area of passion right now.
Fire ring. Yeah.
But it needs sharing, because I know for a fact you say it over and over and over and over and over. But you know, if we can say it on this platform,
yeah,
hopefully other parents don't have to.
Fingers crossed.
Hopefully people start hearing it.
So we'll be back next week with more FASD specific education topics, and we hope that you'll join us then. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.